I was 27 the day my mother told me I was lucky to have been born without problems, as if ease had been my inheritance and my burden all at once. She was knitting by the window, her voice soft and deliberate, like she was sharing some divine secret passed down through generations. I had just found out my bank account had been drained. $14,000, gone overnight. My sister and brother-in-law sat on the couch, legs draped over each other like lovers at a beach house, not thieves in broad daylight. They didn't flinch when I asked where the money went. Instead, they offered up that casual, collective shrug I had grown to resent. Seth, my brother-in-law, beer in hand, grinned like I'd just accused him of stealing my sandwich, not my financial stability. Sarah, my older sister, simply sipped her wine and said, "Oh, don't be so dramatic, it's not like we stole it. We're family." That word again. Family. What they never said, but always made sure I understood, was that my place in the family came with conditions. Keep the peace, stay out of the way, and when something breaks, you fix it. And God help you if you ever ask for anything in return. I didn't scream that day. I didn't cry or slam the door or even demand they pay me back. No, I stood there, holding my breath, watching my mother hum quietly as she slipped another knit into place, like none of it concerned her at all. My father didn't even look up from his phone. And when I asked if they knew what Sarah and Seth had done, my mother sighed like I was the one ruining the afternoon. "Sweetheart, you're always so sensitive. You have a good job, no mortgage, no kids. You're fine." That was the day I learned that being fine in my family meant I owed everyone else something. Money, time, silence. But let's rewind, shall we? Back to where it all began. Because this didn't start with the missing money. No, that was just the moment the dam finally cracked. The pressure had been building since I was a child, the invisible one, the helper, the one everyone leaned on but no one really saw. When I was 8, I learned the meaning of the word scapegoat, though no one ever said it aloud. It was the 4th of July, and our house was packed with relatives. The backyard smelled like grilled corn and citronella. Kids ran wild through the grass, and uncles argued over politics in the shade. Sarah had been 15 then, radiant, reckless, and already gifted in the art of charming adults with her dimples and feigned innocence. That was the day she shattered my father's antique bourbon decanter. She'd been trying to impress a boy with a bottle spin trick and ended up sending the whole thing flying off the deck. Glass exploded across the wooden planks like diamonds. And without missing a beat, she screamed my name. "Mayon," she shrieked. What the hell? I wasn't even outside. I was in the kitchen refilling the lemonade pitcher. But by the time I came to the door, everyone was staring at me like I'd kicked their dog. "You're grounded for a week," my father had said, voice clipped and final. I opened my mouth to protest, but Sarah gave me a look that said don't even think about it. So I took the punishment, like I always did, while she went back to fluttering her lashes at that boy, who looked at her like she hung the stars. I was the family's invisible fixer. The emotional janitor who cleaned up everyone's messes and quietly disappeared before the thank yous were passed around. When Dad lost his job, I was 12 and started packing lunches for my younger cousins so the adults could focus on the big stuff. When Mom got sick one winter, I learned how to refill her prescriptions and handle insurance calls before I even hit puberty. And Sarah? She floated above it all. The chosen one. The shining star. She always had a way of bending reality to suit her version of the story. If she forgot to pick up her report card, it was because I didn't remind her. If she got caught sneaking out, it was because I set a bad example by staying up too late. Somehow every error she made landed in my lap. And my parents, too exhausted, too blind, or too enchanted, always believed her. Our family had a tradition, the annual summer reunion. It was sacred, hosted every July at my grandparents' old lake house, a sprawling property where mosquitoes thrived and secrets festered like rot beneath the floorboards. People came in from out of state, drove 6, sometimes 10 hours, just to play nice for a long weekend. There were barbecues and boat rides and late-night poker games where the men drank too much and the women whispered behind frosted glasses. The summer I turned 17, that reunion became a turning point I didn't realize I needed. It started with something small, like most betrayals do. Sarah had borrowed my debit card, just for gas, she said. I was working 2 part-time jobs that summer, saving for college, while she drifted between internships and beach weekends with her friends. I asked for the card back twice before I finally checked my account, for $100 gone. When I confronted her, she laughed. "Oh, relax," she said, eyes rolling. "I needed to pay for the dog's vet visit. You love Max, don't you?" Max was our childhood dog. Yes. But Sarah's responsibility, not mine. I paid for the visit, apparently, and also a new purse, judging by the charges on my statement. I went to my mother again, hoping, just once, she'd see through the facade. "Your sister's under a lot of stress," she said, sipping from her wine glass. "She's got a lot going on. And you? You're stronger. You always have been." No matter what Sarah did, I was the one expected to understand, to accommodate, to forgive. My anger didn't matter. My voice didn't carry. But I began to keep receipts, both literal and emotional. I wrote everything down in a journal I hid inside a box of tampons in my closet, because I knew no one in that house would ever go looking there. And the more I wrote, the clearer the pattern became. I'll never forget the moment the gaslighting reached its peak. It was the family reunion this summer after college. I had just started my first real job, a marketing role at a tech firm, and I'd brought a boyfriend home for the first time. His name was Jacob. He was kind, grounded, and incredibly observant. "You okay?" he whispered on the first night after dinner. "Why wouldn't I be?" I asked, though I already knew what he meant. "Everyone keeps treating you like you're the assistant, not a guest. You brought the food, cleaned the grill, set the table, and they haven't said thank you once." I shrugged. That's just how it is. But once someone else sees the pattern, it's hard to ignore it yourself. On the second night, Seth made a joke at my expense, something about how I always had my nose in a spreadsheet, how I'd probably schedule my own funeral on Google Calendar. Everyone laughed, even my father. Jacob didn't. "That wasn't funny," he said, voice cool. It was rude. The room went quiet. "Just a joke," Seth said, still smiling. Jacob got up and left the room. I followed him, heart pounding. "You don't have to defend me," I said quietly. "Maybe not," he replied. "But it's about time someone did." The journal grew thicker that year. The betrayals more expensive, the expectations heavier. And I began to ask myself the question that would become the backbone of my eventual reckoning. Why do they always treat me like this? The answer came in pieces, subtle, insidious realizations that crawled into my mind late at night. Because I never made them pay. Because I always forgave them. Because I stayed. Because they knew I would. But the thing about being the glue that holds a broken family together is this. Eventually, you get tired of being spread so thin. Eventually, you decide to let it all fall apart. And when it does, no one will be able to say they didn't see it coming. Not this time. I knew something was wrong the moment I walked into the house that afternoon. The air felt too still, like everyone had already agreed on something before I arrived, and they were just waiting for the scene to unfold. I had parked on the street like always, arms heavy with the graduation cake I had baked myself and a small folder of resumes, since my Aunt Marianne had promised to pass one to her colleague at the university. The cake was strawberry cream, Sarah's favorite, even though the day was supposed to be about me. It was supposed to be my celebration. I had walked across that stage earlier that morning, summa cum laude, the first in our family to do so, and instead of pride or applause, I got polite nods, distracted glances, and a text from Sarah that said, "Don't forget to bring plates." Not congratulations. Not I'm proud of you. Just plates. And still, I showed up. Because for some reason I still believed that if I just worked hard enough, sacrificed more, stayed quieter, they would eventually love me the way I had always loved them. I carried the cake inside and was met with silence. Not the warm, hushed kind of silence where people wait to shout surprise, but a rigid, awkward one, like I had entered a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. My mother stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing the same wine glass over and over again. My father was on the back porch, pretending to prune hedges that didn't need pruning. And Sarah? She was on the living room couch, legs curled under her like royalty, whispering into Aunt Marianne's ear. They didn't even look at me. Not at first. I set the cake down and began unpacking the forks and napkins I had brought, pretending not to notice the tension crawling up the walls like black mold. The younger cousins weren't there. No balloons. No congratulatory banner. Just adults sipping wine like they were already grieving something. It was Sarah who finally spoke. "We need to talk." That sentence, so simple, so familiar, should have come with a warning label. I sat down slowly, every movement deliberate, trying to still my hands that had begun to tremble. She crossed her arms and looked at me with a kind of manufactured pity that made my stomach knot. "You've been creating a lot of tension lately," she began, as if she was the family's appointed spokesperson now. "We've all noticed it." I blinked. "Tension?" Aunt Marianne jumped in. "Sweetheart, it's not that we don't love you. It's just that lately, there's been so much negativity surrounding you." Negativity. That was the word they used when they wanted to erase the truth. That was the word they used when you told them you were hurt. I looked at my mother. She didn't meet my eyes. "What exactly are you accusing me of?" I asked, voice tight. "We saw the journal," Sarah said, her voice cool, almost triumphant. "The one you left on your desk at the lake house." I went cold. "That wasn't for you," I said slowly. "Well, maybe you shouldn't write things if you don't want people reading them," Sarah snapped. "It's filled with things about us. About Mom. About all the things you think we've done to you." Because you did do them, I wanted to scream. Because I was drowning and writing was the only thing keeping me from slipping under. "You made it seem like we abused you," Sarah continued. "You called us manipulators. Users. Parasites." My jaw tightened. "I never said that to anyone." "But you wrote it." "And now everyone knows," Sarah said, standing up now. "Do you know what that did to Mom? To Dad? They're devastated." Funny, I didn't see a single tear in their eyes. Then my father stepped inside, wiping his hands on a towel like this was just another landscaping break. "You need help," he said, his voice a mix of finality and faux concern. "We think it's best if you take some time away from the family." My vision tunneled. "You're cutting me off," I said, not asking, just confirming. "No one's cutting anyone off," Aunt Marianne said, though her tone betrayed the lie. "We just think things have gotten toxic. And maybe it would be healthier for all of us if we had a little space." The betrayal didn't come all at once. It unfolded in slow, searing increments. "You can still reach out," Sarah added. "But maybe not to the cousins. It's confusing for them." I sat perfectly still. If I moved, if I breathed too deeply, I would fall apart. "You're blocking me from the kids?" I asked, voice like glass. "They're young. They don't need the drama," Sarah said. And then my mother finally looked at me and said the words that would echo in my bones for years. "Mayon, you've changed. And not in a good way." The fallout was fast. Swift. Surgical. Within 2 days, I was removed from the family group chat, blocked from Sarah's Instagram, and uninvited from my cousin Ivy's wedding. I only found out when I checked the wedding website and saw my name no longer on the RSVP list. Aunt Marianne stopped returning my emails. Uncle Joe, who used to send me funny cat videos every Thursday, never messaged again. Even Jen, my cousin who used to sneak me Oreos at Christmas and call me her other sister, went quiet. I left voicemails. I sent messages. No one answered. They called it peace. They called it boundaries. I called it what it was, exile. For the first 3 months, I woke up in a fog, heart thudding against a silence that felt too vast, too cruel. I kept waiting for someone to text. I checked my email constantly. Every vibration, every buzz, made my stomach flip. Maybe it was Sarah. Maybe Mom had come to her senses. But they never did. I cried into my pillow every night for a month. Stopped eating. Stopped sleeping. Started wondering if I really was the problem. Maybe I had been too sensitive. Maybe I had made too much of things. Maybe I had been dramatic, bitter, selfish. I began attending therapy at the urging of Jacob, who by then had moved 2 hours away for a job and was slowly slipping from my world too. I couldn't blame him. I was unraveling. And no one wants to be tethered to someone unraveling. I sat in the therapist's office every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Her name was Dana, and she had the patience of someone who had watched 100 people bleed out emotionally in the same beige armchair. I didn't speak the first 2 sessions. Just sat there, stiff and silent, while she waited. Eventually, I told her everything. About the stolen money, the punishments, the favoritism, the way they'd rewritten history to cast me as the villain of a story I hadn't even written. The way I had clung to the hope that someday, someone would say we were wrong. We're sorry. She listened, nodded, took notes. But she never pitied me. She didn't offer hollow comfort. She said, they taught you your needs didn't matter, and you believed them. I started journaling again. Not in a notebook that could be found or used against me, but in voice notes, late at night, whispering into my phone like I was confessing to God in the dark. July 22nd. I spent the whole day pretending to be okay at work. Smiled at Susan's baby photos, laughed at Rob's joke about spreadsheets, then cried in the car until my lungs hurt. My therapist says I'm still grieving, but what I'm grieving isn't dead. It just refuses to love me back. August 3rd. Today I almost texted Mom. I don't know why. I saw a strawberry cake in the bakery window and it made my chest ache. I thought, what if I just say hi? What if I act like none of it happened? And then I remembered. They read my pain and called it poison. September 10th. They said I bring drama. But I didn't bring anything they didn't already set on fire. I just pointed to the smoke. I spiraled, then plateaued. Not healed, not whole, but steady enough to start building something out of the wreckage. I started working out. Not for aesthetics, but because punching a bag felt better than crying. I started drawing again, sharp lines, black ink, bold shapes. And the voice notes turned into something else. Not just grief recordings, but documentation, receipts, evidence. My therapist once said that in dysfunctional families, the scapegoat is often the most emotionally honest member, the one who refuses to participate in the lie. That sentence stayed with me. They weren't just punishing me for what I had done. They were punishing me for seeing the truth, for remembering, for refusing to forget. They say rock bottom has a basement. I found it the night I fell asleep in the break room of a 24-hour diner where I worked double shifts just to cover a mattress on a friend's floor. I had gone from being the dependable one in a family that took me for granted to a woman who sorted ketchup packets and wiped down laminated menus under fluorescent lights that never slept. No one warned me that betrayal steals more than your peace. It also shatters your sense of direction. I woke up most mornings with no plan other than survive. Survival, at its most basic, isn't beautiful. It's eating cold rice 3 days in a row because payday is still a week away. It's taking a walk through the park after dark not because it's safe, but because there's nowhere else to go. It's not poetic or noble. It's lonely, bruising, and unbearably quiet. And still, I kept moving. I worked at that diner from midnight to noon 5 days a week. I didn't complain, not because I was grateful, but because I didn't have the strength to argue with reality. Customers barely saw me. Coworkers treated me like a background noise. The manager, a woman named Rhonda with a voice like gravel and eyeliner sharp enough to slice bread, was the only person who ever looked me in the eye. "You clean like someone who's been disappointed more than once," she said one day as I was scrubbing a gum wad from the underside of table 6. I didn't answer because I didn't know how. She handed me a mug of lukewarm coffee and sat beside me like we'd known each other for years. You let people walk over you long enough, you start thinking pavement is just your place in the world. It was the first time in weeks someone had said anything that cracked through the fog I'd been drowning in. Rhonda wasn't soft. She was the kind of woman who'd been through enough disappointment to forge her own armor out of sarcasm and steel. But she saw me. Not the resume I'd once had. Not the degrees hanging in storage units. Just me, broken and trying, and somehow still showing up to scrub plates that didn't belong to me. "You've got that look," she said one night after a particularly brutal shift. "What look?" "The one people get right before they either burn the world down or build something better from the ashes." I didn't know which one I was yet. She became something like a mentor, though she'd probably roll her eyes if I said that out loud. She didn't coddle me. She didn't quote motivational posters. What she did was simpler and much rarer. She listened when I needed to speak and handed me truth when I needed to hear it. "You think you're weak because they broke you," she said one day, handing me a towel. "But honey, the fact that you're still standing, that's strength most people never learn." She encouraged me to go back to therapy. This time I found a sliding scale clinic in the city and a therapist who didn't talk to me like I was fragile. Instead, he asked me one question that changed everything. "What would you build if no one could take it from you?" I didn't know the answer. Not yet. But that question started something. I began writing again, not just voice notes in the dark, but plans. Ideas. Sketches of a life I could build from scratch. I remembered how good I had been at digital design back in college. I started freelancing on the side. Small logos for small businesses. Instagram graphics for food trucks. A local yoga studio paid me $200 to revamp their entire website, and that felt like winning the lottery. Rhonda saw my eyes light up when I got the check and raised an eyebrow. "You gonna stay wiping tables forever, or are you finally gonna bet on yourself?" It terrified me. But the thought of being stuck terrified me more. So I did it. I built a business from the corner of a borrowed living room. I used a 5-year-old laptop that overheated if I opened more than 2 tabs. I took on any project that came my way: wedding invitations, political campaign branding, nonprofit outreach materials. I worked until my wrists ached and my vision blurred. But for the first time in years, the pain felt like something I chose. And slowly, the work started to grow. One happy client became 3, then 10. I created a portfolio, built a professional site, and finally saved enough to move out of couch surfing and into a studio apartment that barely fit my bed but still felt like a castle. It wasn't just a business. It was mine. No one could take it. No one could lie their way into controlling it. No one could gaslight me into believing it didn't matter. And when I got my first client referral from someone I'd never met, someone who said, "I heard you're the best," I cried for 20 minutes and then worked for 20 hours. 2 years passed like that. I became known for clean, sharp branding with emotionally resonant messaging. My small one-woman business became a 6-figure company. I hired 2 freelancers, both women who'd also clawed their way out of chaos. We didn't call ourselves survivors. We called ourselves architects. Because we weren't rebuilding ruins. We were building cathedrals from stone people threw at us. Then, the house happened. It wasn't planned. I had just finished a project for a real estate investor who loved my work and offered a discount if I was ever looking to buy. At first, I laughed. Me? Buy property? I had once cried over overdraft fees. But the more I looked, the more I realized I wanted a space of my own. A space that wasn't attached to memories I never wanted to relive. I found it on a rainy Tuesday, a 2-bedroom fixer-upper at the edge of the city, with ivy creeping up the porch and hardwood floors hidden beneath years of dust and neglect. The previous owner had passed away, and the house had sat vacant for a decade. Most people saw decay. I saw potential. I bought it in cash, every dollar a testament to the woman I had become. And then I began the real work. The renovation took 9 months. I didn't just paint the walls. I filled them with meaning. The living room was painted in deep green, the exact shade of the forest where I used to walk alone, finding peace when no one gave it to me. The kitchen backsplash was hand-tiled with ceramic fragments I had collected over the years, pieces of broken plates, glass, even keys that no longer opened any door. My office, the beating heart of my business, had one wall covered entirely in framed quotes I had once whispered into a phone at 3 a.m. "I'm not broken. I'm building. I remember what you did, and I still chose peace." They said I was too much, but I was just too awake. In the backyard, I planted lavender and rosemary, herbs my grandmother used to grow before dementia erased her memory of my name. Each room told a story, not of what I lost, but of what I had learned to claim. And when I finally stepped back and looked at it, I didn't see a house. I saw a monument. I began hosting dinners. Not the kind where people pretend to love each other, but the kind where real laughter fills the air and no one has to walk on eggshells. My guests were a patchwork family: Rhonda from the diner who had retired and now made killer sangria, Cam, a trans artist who taught me how to screen print t-shirts and never let me talk down about myself, Layla, a former therapist who left the system and started her own trauma-informed coaching collective. They were not blood. They were better. And still, something inside me whispered, not regret, not longing, but a question I couldn't silence. What would you say to them if you saw them now? Some days, I imagined confronting them, telling them every painful thing they ever made me carry. Other days, I dreamed of showing them everything I had built and watching the realization flicker across their faces, the one that said, "You didn't destroy me. You just pushed me into becoming someone you can no longer touch." But beneath all of that, I wrestled with something darker, the seed of bitterness that, if left unchecked, could take root and choke every good thing I had created. So, I went back to therapy. I spoke the words I hadn't said in years. They don't get to break me and bury me and then also live rent-free in my mind forever. My therapist asked what I wanted. "I want peace," I said. "But I also want them to know." Know what? That I'm not waiting for their apology anymore. That I never needed their permission to matter. That I made something beautiful without them. He nodded. "Then maybe you've already won." They came on a Sunday, just after the rain, when the lavender in my garden was still dripping with silver and the light filtering through the stained glass transom over the front door made everything inside glow like it belonged to a cathedral. It wasn't a reunion. I hadn't asked for reconciliation. But I had left the door cracked, just enough for them to walk in and see the aftermath of their absence. It started with an email from my cousin Jen, one of the few voices from that side of my family that had never gone completely silent. Her message was short, warm in tone, and ended with a careful, almost childlike question. "I saw your name in the paper. Your business got profiled. I'm proud of you. Do you think we could see the house?" I reread it 3 times. Then I crafted the reply with surgical precision: no anger, no sarcasm, no vulnerability. Just one line that said everything I needed it to. "If you're truly curious, come by next Sunday at 3. I CC'd the family group email, the one they once deleted me from and now used for baby showers and vacation photos I would never be invited to see. No further explanation. No follow-up. Just an open door for one final chapter. The house was prepared like a stage. Not because I wanted applause, but because I needed truth to echo off the walls in ways they could not ignore or deny. Every room told a story, and each story carried weight, carefully selected, quietly searing, impossible to misunderstand. In the entryway, I placed a narrow console table, topped with framed invoices and PayPal receipts. The ones I had kept over the years, the forgotten debt Sarah never repaid, the rent I covered for Seth, the tuition contributions my parents once claimed were anonymous miracles. All dated, all documented. Next to those, I placed a single, black-bound journal, the original one, the one they read without permission, the one they used to justify cutting me out. It sat open to a page that read in bold pen strokes: "If telling the truth makes me the villain, then perhaps this family always needed one." The living room was curated and deliberate, intentional contrast to the memories they had of me. Velvet emerald couches, art-lined walls, every piece created by women who had survived something, thrived afterward, and then dared to display it. On the far wall, opposite the bay window, hung a photo gallery. Each frame contained one snapshot from my afterlife. Not the one they abandoned, but the one I built when they weren't looking. Me, in my studio with clients. Me, hammering a tile into the kitchen wall with dirt on my jeans and fire in my eyes. Me, in a circle of friends who had become family, laughing, real, alive. And at the center of it all, in a gold frame, no wider than my palm, a screenshot of the group chat I had been removed from. The caption beneath it simply said, "Not invited, but unforgettable." They arrived together, Jen, Sarah, my parents, Aunt Marianne, and even Seth, in his smug suburban haircut and recycled apologies. Their clothes were conservative, carefully chosen like they had come to a wake, unsure of who had died. I opened the door and said nothing. They entered slowly, eyes scanning everything. Not just the house, but me. Gone was the girl with sunken shoulders and second-hand clothes. In her place stood a woman wrapped in quiet luxury, with a tailored navy dress, hair pinned back like a CEO, and a stare that didn't ask for acknowledgement. "Mayon," Sarah said, blinking as if she'd rehearsed this in her head 1,000 times and still didn't know where to begin. "You look different?" I offered, my tone a precise scalpel. She nodded, not meeting my eyes. I motioned for them to follow. "Let's not waste time. There's something I'd like you to see." They gathered in the living room like guests who didn't know if they were invited or warned. My mother's eyes moved from portrait to invoice to screen capture, like someone flipping through a crime scene. My father stood stiffly near the door, his hands clenched so tightly I could see the tendons tremble. I stood in the center, back straight, breath steady. "Everything in this house is a memory," I began. "Not of what you gave me, but of what you made me survive." They said nothing, but their silence was thick, not with guilt yet, but with discomfort, confusion, dread. "You cut me out," I said simply. "Not for what I did, but for what I noticed. For what I dared to name." I walked slowly to the table and placed one manicured hand on the journal. "You read this and called me bitter. You read my grief and labeled it poison. You turned it into evidence for an exile I didn't deserve." Sarah shifted on her feet. "You made us look like monsters." "You acted like monsters," I replied. "I just wrote it down." I turned to my father. "You told me I was too sensitive when they stole from me. You said I was fine because I didn't have children or a mortgage. You used my independence as an excuse to bleed me dry. Then to Seth, you took my money without asking, and when I begged for accountability, you mocked me with your beer in hand. To my mother, you watched. You always watched. And then you chose comfort over correction, silence over support." Her face broke, just a flicker. But it was enough. I took a step back and let the room breathe. "I didn't invite you here for an apology," I continued. "Because I don't need one." They looked at me like they couldn't believe that was true. "I invited you here so you could see what it looks like when someone refuses to die quietly." Jen's voice cracked. "We were wrong." I looked at her, not harshly, but clearly. "Maybe. Or maybe you were just scared that the person you trained to carry your burdens finally put them down." The silence that followed was the deepest kind, the kind where shame and recognition meet for the first time. I walked to a small end table beside the fireplace and picked up a phone. They watched, confused. "I recorded this conversation," I said, voice calm, eyes steady. "Not for revenge. Not for leverage. For closure. For proof that I faced you, told the truth, and survived it." Sarah gasped. My father's mouth opened. Then I scrolled to the file, selected it, and deleted it in front of them. No backup. No archive. Just gone. "Because I don't need to hold on to this anymore," I said. "Not to punish you. Not even to protect myself." I walked to the door and opened it wide. "You may leave now." They hesitated. I didn't blink. One by one, they walked out, slower than they'd come in, paler, smaller, older. None of them said goodbye. Jen lingered, her hand grazing the frame that held the chat screenshot. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I nodded once. "I know. But that doesn't change what happened." She left. I closed the door. And I leaned against it, not broken, not shaken, but more whole than I had ever been. A week passed before I felt the weight of what I had done settle fully into my bones, not like guilt, not like regret, but something slower and heavier, something that reminded me of the silence that comes after an earthquake. Not the chaos of the impact itself, but the strange stillness that follows when nothing else is falling anymore. A strange kind of peace, not because everything was fine, but because I had finally decided that it didn't need to be. I didn't expect to hear from them again. And for a while, I didn't. The inbox stayed quiet. The phone remained silent. There were no more accidental invitations to family functions, no soft check-ins masked as concern. The distance they once imposed became something I now enforced, not as punishment, but as preservation. I had become fluent in the art of silence, not out of coldness, but because I had learned how loud dignity can be when you stop begging to be heard. Then, 2 months after the confrontation, the first letter arrived. It was handwritten, soft cursive on cream stationery that looked too fragile to carry the weight of everything left unsaid. It was from my mother. She didn't start with "I'm sorry." Instead, she opened with a memory, a small one of the time I stayed home from prom to take care of her when she was sick, a night I had all but buried in the shadow of what followed. She wrote about how she remembered the towel I had soaked and folded across her forehead, the soup I had made from scratch, the way I had rubbed her back while she tried not to cry from the pain in her joints. She didn't apologize directly, but she said something that lingered in my chest like fog. "I think I knew even then," she wrote, "that you deserved more than we ever gave you. I just didn't know how to tell you. I thought loving your sister louder was the same as loving you. I see now that it wasn't." I folded the letter quietly and placed it in a drawer. I didn't write back. Some wounds don't need reopening. Some truths don't require applause. But I kept it, not as a token of reconciliation, but as a record that someone, somewhere, finally said the quiet part out loud. My therapist once told me that healing doesn't always look like forgiveness. Sometimes it looks like choosing yourself, again and again, without shame. And that's what I did. Every morning I woke up in that house I built. I did it with intention. I poured my coffee into handmade ceramic mugs from a local artist whose studio I sponsored. I opened emails from young creatives asking to intern with my company, and I replied with mentorship offers that came from a place of generosity, not saviorism. I spoke at panels about women in business, about emotional labor, about how building something doesn't always mean starting from scratch. Sometimes it means dragging the wreckage into the light and hammering it into something new. And I didn't do it to prove anything to the people who doubted me. I did it because I was finally becoming the person I had once begged someone else to see in me. There were other letters. Sarah wrote eventually. Hers was 2 pages long, typed, clinical. She apologized for the money, for the lies, for the manipulation. But the subtext still clung to her signature, that familiar tone of self-defense, of justification masked as reflection. "I was hurting too," she wrote. "You just didn't see it." I didn't keep her letter. Because accountability wrapped in excuses is just another form of silence. Seth never wrote. My father sent one sentence in an email that read, "I hope you're well." I left it unread, not because I was angry, but because some bridges don't burn, they erode, slowly, until there's nothing left to stand on. I had chosen not to rebuild it. Years passed. The house became more than just a home. It became a sanctuary for people who had been erased, overlooked, misunderstood. I hosted artists' residencies in the garden shed I had converted into a guest studio. I ran workshops for women starting over, women who had been cast out, shut down, told they were too emotional, too loud, too much. We called it The Root. Because that's what we had all become, women who learned how to dig down, how to stay alive even in places where no one expected us to grow. One evening, as the sun began to sink low over the hill behind my backyard, a young girl wandered up to my gate. She couldn't have been more than 12. She wore a backpack nearly twice the size of her torso and carried a sketchbook filled with faces drawn in charcoal and heartbreak. "Are you the lady who lives in the house with the stories?" she asked, her voice tentative. I nodded and knelt to her level. "My aunt said you help people, that you listen." I offered her a seat on the garden bench beneath the archway of roses. "What's your name?" "Leah." I smiled, slowly, gently. "What do you want to build, Leah?" She blinked. No one had ever asked her that. "I want to draw things that make people feel less alone." I nodded once because I understood. "That's how it starts," I said. "With one person deciding their story matters, even if no one else sees it yet." She smiled, the kind that doesn't know how powerful it is yet. That night, after she left with a new set of colored pencils and an invitation to come back anytime, I sat in the middle of the garden, watching the lavender sway in the breeze. The sun dipped lower, casting long, golden fingers across the ground. I exhaled slowly, not because everything was perfect, but because everything was mine. And as the last light disappeared behind the trees, I whispered into the quiet, not to the people who hurt me, not to the ghosts of my past, but to the girl I had once been, the one who waited in empty rooms, who begged to be chosen, who believed love meant enduring pain in silence. We made it. And then, as the moon rose above the branches, I spoke once more, not a declaration, not a threat, but a truth that tasted like freedom. I built this with what they tried to bury me in. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't need to say anything else.